Welcome back, my friend. Tonight, we drift into the snow-covered silence of 1812, the year when a man who once believed himself invincible finally met something colder than his own ambition, the Russian winter. Dim the lights, pull the blanket close, and let the wind outside your window mingle with your breath. Because tonight's story isn't about bullets or glory, it's about something unseen that broke an empire. The cold. The 19th century began with a name that made all of Europe tremble: Napoleon Bonaparte. He was not born in a palace, but on a small Mediterranean island, Corsica, where the sea was salty and ambition was a form of hunger. Through brilliance, discipline, and a relentless belief in destiny, he climbed his way to a throne forged from the ruins of fallen kings. By the early 1810s, Napoleon was not merely the Emperor of France. He was the man who had reshaped Europe itself. From Madrid to Vienna, from Berlin to Rome, the old map of the world had been torn apart and redrawn under his hand. His army, the Grand Armée, was the greatest force ever to march across the continent. Over 500,000 men, trained, loyal, and convinced that they served a genius who could not fail. But at the very height of his power, a hairline crack appeared, one that hides inside every great man: pride. Napoleon began to believe that he was not merely human, but the hand of history itself, that every battle, every border, every crown existed only to bend before his will. And yet, on the eastern edge of the map, one vast kingdom still stood untouched: the Russian Empire, a land so enormous that it seemed to stretch into myth, a place where winter was not just a season, but a religion, and every living thing bowed before the frost. Napoleon had conquered deserts and plains, kings and empires, and he believed Russia would be no different. But in St. Petersburg, Tsar Alexander I refused to fight on Napoleon's terms. He withdrew his armies deeper and deeper into his own country, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. A trap made not of walls, but of distance. So, in the summer of 1812, Europe echoed with the thunder of drums, hooves, and the cries of "Vive l'Empereur!" Long live the Emperor! 600,000 soldiers, the largest army the world had ever seen, began to march eastward. They carried banners, confidence, and a simple promise: in a few weeks Moscow will kneel. Behind them lay the golden fields of France, the girls who kissed their hands goodbye, the whispered vows to return with victory. Ahead of them only the horizon, endless and pale. At first, the sky was blue, the air warm, the roads alive with song. The soldiers believed they were marching into history's greatest triumph. They did not know they were marching into a cemetery made of snow, where every milestone would become a gravestone. Napoleon expected a swift campaign, but the Russians refused to play his game. No grand battles, no decisive victory, only villages burning, fields turned to ash, and storehouses stripped bare. It was the scorched earth strategy, and it devoured the Grand Armée faster than any musket ever could. Bread became rarer than gold. Horses collapsed on the roads. The summer air began to smell of rot and despair. And somewhere along those endless marches, faith in the emperor began to melt like frost at sunrise. When you imagine Napoleon, Don't picture only the small man in the blue coat and the familiar bicorn hat. Picture him instead standing in a white desert not of sand, but of snow, surrounded by hundreds of thousands of men growing silent, starving, and frozen. A man who once decided the fate of nations, now reduced to warming his hands with his own breath. Perhaps, in that moment, as he stared across the frozen horizon that stretched without end, he understood that there are things even an empire cannot conquer: distance, time, and the cold indifference of nature. Tonight's story is not about victory, but about limits, the fragile edge where genius meets mortality. It's the story of a man who saw the boundaries of his own greatness, not on a map, but in the frozen eyes of the soldiers who died believing in him. And it's the story of an enemy that carried no sword, fired no shot, and yet was utterly undefeated. The winter of Russia. Take a slow breath. Imagine your own breath as the ghostly vapor of those men, drifting into the night, lost to the wind. And as you close your eyes, we'll follow them, across the plains, across the rivers, into days when the sun could no longer give warmth. Because tonight, we follow Napoleon himself, deep into Russia, where winter is not a season, but a silent general. You begin in sunlight. It is the summer of 1812, and the world looks obedient. The sky over the Vistula River is an impossible blue, the kind of sky that makes you believe in destiny, or at least in good weather for marching. The fields glitter with early wheat, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the emperor's banners ripple like little pieces of dawn. You can hear the hum of an empire moving. 600,000 men, French, Polish, German, Italian, Dutch, Croatian, even Spanish, a continent walking in unison, boots drumming the same rhythm, all of Europe condensed into one arrogant heartbeat. The air smells of leather, iron, and horse sweat. You are part of something enormous, something so vast that it seems foolish to imagine it could fail. The Grande Armée stretches farther than the eye can see, a river of uniforms flowing east. There are officers on fine horses, glittering with medals, wagon loads of cannons polished like church bells, cooks, tailors, scribes, and surgeons, even musicians. Someone is playing a flute badly, but no one minds. Napoleon himself rides ahead, a small man in a big hat, looking at maps that seem to shrink as he stares at them. To him, Russia is simply another shape waiting to be redrawn, another campaign, another correction to history. He has conquered kingdoms and rewritten borders like a man rearranging furniture. Why should this be different? He calls it a swift expedition. A few months, perhaps. We'll be home by Christmas, say the officers. You nod, because no one questions the emperor. You've seen him before, that distant, sharp profile, like a coin pressed by ambition. He believes himself chosen, and for now, so do you. The Russians will fight, you tell yourself. They must. No empire worth its frost could watch an enemy stride through its fields without answer. But days pass, and the only enemy you find is space. Endless, flat, and strangely silent. The first villages are deserted shutters hanging loose, wells dry, the smell of ash still warm in the air. Chickens run wild through empty streets. Bread ovens still glow faintly, but there's no one left to curse you for eating their crusts. The people have vanished, and the land feels abandoned. It's a strange kind of war, one where the foe does not appear, but the hunger does. Napoleon calls it strategy. He says the Russians retreat to draw him deeper, to trade distance for survival. You don't understand all that. You only know that your feet hurt, your water skin is empty, and the sun is not kind. The fields grow drier each day. Dust clings to your tongue and eyebrows. Horses cough in the heat. At night, the stars stretch wide above you, endless, pitiless, and even they seem to shimmer with laughter. It's not what you imagined. You thought there would be glory drums, banners, cannon, thunder. Instead, there is the rhythm of blisters, the ache of carrying too much on your back, and the quiet realization that Russia is not a country, but a distance. You pass through Minsk, Vilna, Smolensk, names that roll off the tongue like milestones in a dream. But dreams tire the legs. The Grand Armée moves slower now. Supplies lag behind. The wagons bog down in mud. There is always mud, as if the earth itself were trying to drag you backward. The emperor rides past from time to time, wrapped in his gray coat, expression fixed and unbothered. He doesn't sweat like the rest of you. Perhaps ambition has its own climate. When he looks at the horizon, you can almost hear him whispering to it, "Mine." You begin to understand why people follow him. He carries his certainty like a torch in the dark, and yet even torches can be smothered by wind. One night, you camp near a forest that smells of resin and smoke. The trees are black silhouettes against a copper sky. You can hear distant thunder, but it isn't weather, it's cannon fire somewhere far ahead. The rumor spreads. The Russians have finally stopped running. You feel a rush of relief. Anything is better than marching through ghosts. You want a battle, something to name, to make the suffering make sense. But when dawn comes, the only thing left of that battle is more smoke, and a few scattered bodies, Russian and French, burned together. The fields are scorched, wells poisoned, granaries empty. The Russians, it seems, fight not to win, but to erase. They burn what they cannot carry, destroy what they cannot defend. They fight by absence, and absence is winning. You never see their faces, only what they leave behind. Ashes, silence, and a road that keeps getting longer. Napoleon calls this retreat cowardice. But you begin to suspect it is something else, something colder, older, patient as frost. The men start to change. The jokes fade. The songs quiet. You eat whatever you can find. Green apples, bark, horse meat when one collapses. You stop counting days. The army that once sang anthems now walks like ghosts in uniform. You pass fields where wildflowers grow through the skeletons of burned wagons. Flies hum around the dead horses. Somewhere, a drummer boy beats half a rhythm before giving up. The emperor orders the march to continue. "Forward," he says, as if the word itself could conjure food. His voice carries through the ranks like an oath or a curse. Forward, always forward. But forward begins to feel like falling. When the army reaches Smolensk, the air is different, cooler, sharper. The first hints of autumn ride the wind, and the soldiers welcome it at first, a relief from the heat, a kindness from the sky. They do not yet understand that this breeze is a warning. The Battle of Smolensk is chaos, walls collapsing, streets burning, smoke thick as syrup. You fight not men, but flame and hunger. You see Russian soldiers for the first time in weeks, grim, silent, their coats ragged, eyes hollow. They fight like men who already know they will die, and that knowledge makes them impossible to defeat. When the smoke clears, Smolensk is gone, not conquered, not captured, just gone. The Russians have retreated again, leaving only ruin in your hands. The Grand Armée marches into victory and finds only ashes. Napoleon rides through the wreckage in silence. He dismounts near a ruined church and kicks at the rubble. No words, only the crackle of something still burning. And then he says quietly, to no one in particular, the Russians would rather destroy their own land than surrender it. He almost sounds impressed. The march continues. The heat fades, replaced by wind that bites through cloth. Horses die faster now, their ribs sharp as blades. Men fight over dead animals, stripping meat with bayonets. You start to see frost on the edges of your boots in the morning. It melts by noon, but you notice it. Everyone does. You begin to count the nights by how cold your breath looks. The laughter of summer is gone. Even the crows are quiet. Somewhere, the emperor receives letters, rumors from Paris, whispers of betrayal in Spain, unrest in Prussia. But here, none of that matters. There is only the sound of boots on frozen mud and the question that grows louder with each step. Where is Russia? You've been walking toward it for months, but it never seems to arrive. It stretches ahead, infinite, mocking. Every mile feels like trespassing on something that does not want you. One evening, the wind changes. It carries the faint smell of snow not yet falling, but waiting. The sky turns pale, the light brittle as glass. The officers whisper that Moscow is near. You want to believe them. You have to. You imagine fires, food, roofs that do not leak. You imagine the emperor triumphant, dictating peace under gilded ceilings. You imagine warmth. But that night, as you lie half asleep beside a dying campfire, you realize that the wind has teeth. It nips at your fingers and makes your breath shimmer in the air. You pull your coat tighter. You tell yourself it's nothing, just weather. But deep down, you know something has shifted. The world feels tilted. Even the stars seem colder. You don't yet know it, but the campaign has already lost. It just hasn't admitted it yet. The first snowflake will fall soon, and when it does, it will not melt. You wake to frost on the edge of your blanket. It's thin, almost delicate, like lace woven by the night itself. When you touch it, it disappears, but the chill it leaves behind doesn't. The fires burn low, guarded by men who no longer talk, only stare. The sun rises pale, tired. Even it seems reluctant to look east. Somewhere, Napoleon's officers speak of momentum. They whisper about supply lines and morale, about victory just beyond the next bend in the road. You've stopped believing in bends. The road never ends. At noon, you pass another village, or what's left of one. The roofs have collapsed. The wells are filled with stones. Someone carved words into a doorframe before leaving, "Better ashes than enemies." You don't know the language, but you understand the sentiment. The emperor calls it barbarism. You call it clever. The march grinds on. Wagons creak like old bones. Men stumble and curse and get up again, because falling means being trampled. Every day, the column grows thinner, like a candle burning from both ends. The horses' eyes are dull. The drummers no longer drum. Sometimes you wonder if the Russians are even real. Perhaps the cold itself is their army. Perhaps the land is alive, conspiring against you. erasing everything warm and human. Then, one evening, you see them. Far ahead, dark shapes on a ridge. The enemy at last. The order goes down the line like an electric prayer. Battle. Muskets are checked, sabers unsheathed, hope briefly resurrected. At least fighting feels familiar. But by the time you reach the ridge, they're gone again, leaving only smoke and a dead ox half buried in mud. The ox looks at you with glassy eyes, as if to say, "You're next." You eat it anyway. Days blur into weeks. The maps mean nothing now. Rivers appear where none were drawn. Bridges vanish overnight. Scouts return with frost-bitten fingers and stories of emptiness. The land keeps retreating faster than you can chase it. You begin to notice the small cruelties of distance. How bread freezes into stone. How boots wear through from within. How silence becomes a sound you can hear. At night, men mutter to themselves. Some pray, others bargain. Everyone lies mostly to their own stomachs. Napoleon rides through the ranks, wrapped in that gray coat again. The soldiers still cheer when he passes, out of habit more than faith. He nods, a god reduced to routine. You wonder if he feels the cold. He must, but he would never admit it. Once, you catch him staring at the horizon, lips moving. You think he's praying, but no, he's doing math. Counting miles, rations, lives. Numbers always obeyed him before. Now they slip through his fingers like snow. When you reach the Borodino plain, the sky hangs low, heavy with thunderclouds that smell of iron. The Russians have finally stopped running. You can see them lines of gray coats, cannons glinting like dull eyes. You exhale. At last, a real war. Something solid to hold. The battle begins at dawn. The ground shakes. The air thickens. And the noise is beyond noise, a physical thing that claws at your ribs. You fire. Reload. Fire again. Smoke erases the Sunday. The smell of powder and blood blend until you can't tell one from the other. By evening, Borodino is a field of silence. 80,000 men have fallen, and the earth drinks slowly. You have won, they say, but victory has no taste. You look around and realize that winning here feels exactly like losing. The Russians withdraw once more, and Napoleon claims the field. He calls it glory. You call it exhaustion. After Borodino, there's nothing left between you and Moscow. The word passes through the ranks like a fever. Moscow, the golden city, the heart of Russia. You imagine it glowing on the horizon, onion domes, markets, warmth, the promise of rest, of food, of something human again. When the first rooftops appear, you almost cry. The city is vast, beautiful, unreal. Even the horses lift their heads. You have made it. But as you march closer, something feels wrong. The streets are empty. Windows shuttered. Doors wide open. No bells, no merchants, no laughter. Moscow is silent. Napoleon rides through the gates, expecting to be greeted by trembling diplomats. Instead, he finds dust, a dog barking somewhere far off, curtains fluttering in an unseen wind. You set up camp in the squares and wait. The emperor waits too. He writes proclamations of peace no one will read, drafts letters to a czar who never replies. He orders parades for citizens who do not exist. And then, one night, Moscow begins to burn. It starts as a whisper, a single plume of smoke rising near the river. Then another, and another. The wind carries sparks across rooftops like red snow. Within hours, the whole horizon glows. The fire eats everything. Warehouses, churches, palaces, all vanish in a roaring storm of orange light. The air is a living thing, full of cinders and screams. Horses bolt. Men cough black. You try to help, but there's nothing to help. Someone says the Russians did it, that their own people set the fires before fleeing. Someone else swears it's punishment from God. You don't care who lit it. You just watch the city you've crossed half the world for burn itself to dust. Napoleon stands on a hill, face lit by the flames. His shadow stretches long behind him, longer than the empire itself. He doesn't move for a long time. Then he turns to his aides and says quietly, "The enemy has left me nothing but ashes." And no one answers. What could they say? The glow of the burning city reflects in everyone's eyes, making you look like ghosts already. Days pass in a haze of smoke and coughing. The air tastes of metal and regret. There is no food, no shelter, and now, no reason. Napoleon waits for peace, but peace never comes. The Tsar does not write back. The snow begins to fall, just a few flakes at first, soft as forgiveness. You tell yourself it's beautiful. You tell yourself it will stop. It doesn't. The flakes thicken, grow sharper, colder, relentless. They settle on cannons, on corpses, on your eyelashes. The city that burned for days now freezes in silence. You realize then that you are not leaving Russia. Russia is leaving you. It withdraws into its own winter, sealing itself shut like a wound. The emperor gives the order at last. Retreat. The word feels strange in his mouth, like a foreign language. The army begins to turn west, back toward the world of warmth and sanity. But the world has changed its locks. The roads you came by are gone, swallowed by snow and memory. The same wind that once carried songs now carries only the sound of boots on ice. You look back once, over your shoulder, at the ruins of Moscow. Smoke still rises, curling into the white sky like a last breath. It is said that when the city burned, the bells melted. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's why the silence feels like ringing. You walk for days through falling snow, each step slower than the last. Horses die standing. Men die sitting. The road disappears beneath you, and you keep walking because stopping means becoming part of it. You start to dream, while awake, of Paris, of bread, of heat. Sometimes you see faces in the snow, smiling kindly. You follow them, but they vanish. The snow does that. It's good at taking things. The emperor rides among the ruins of his army, still wrapped in that gray coat, still pretending the cold cannot touch him. Perhaps it can't. Perhaps he is already frozen inside. He says nothing now. There are no speeches, no proclamations, only the quiet hiss of snow landing on steel. And you, one small heartbeat in an army that once filled the horizon, realize that the campaign has become something else entirely, not a march of conquest, but a pilgrimage into humility. You began in sunlight. You end in silence. The golden fields are far behind you, and ahead lies only the white, endless breath of winter. The cold doesn't hate you. It simply doesn't care. And that, you think, is the most terrifying enemy of all. You keep marching east. You don't remember when you started, or why. Somewhere behind you lies Europe, clean streets, church bells, warm bread, the sound of languages that don't bite. Ahead, there is only the gray breath of Russia, stretching forever. Each morning looks the same. A horizon that refuses to move. A sky that seems to have forgotten color. The road beneath you feels like it was built by ghosts, straight, endless, indifferent. Villages appear on the horizon like promises, but they are always ruins when you reach them. Burned roofs, scorched wells, a pot still smoking on a hearth where no one remains to stir it. The army used to sing when it marched. Now it coughs. 600,000 men once moved like a single living creature. Now it's more like a procession of shadows, some limping, some staggering, all too tired to care about the difference. You've stopped asking where you are. The maps say one thing, but the land says another. You start to notice how time changes here. Days stretch out like chewing gum, long, flavorless, impossible to swallow. The sun rises, moves, and sets with mechanical precision, yet somehow it feels like nothing moves at all. You march all day and end exactly where you began, surrounded by the same emptiness. The officers say you're winning. You look around and see men with hollow eyes gnawing on leather belts. If this is victory, you think, it's a strange kind. At night, the fires burn low because there's little left to burn. You watch the sparks rise and vanish into the dark, and you think about home, about how firelight there used to mean safety. Here, it just means you've survived another day. Somewhere far ahead, the Russians are still retreating. They leave trails of smoke and silence, like ghosts leading you deeper into their world. You begin to wonder if they exist at all, or if Russia itself is the enemy, a single vast mind with no face, no voice, only patience. You're not used to patience. You come from an empire that measures everything in speed, fast battles, fast glory, fast history. But this land doesn't care about your schedule. It moves at the pace of moss and wind and death. Napoleon said the campaign would last weeks. It's been months. He still believes in the map, tracing neat blue lines across parchment as if reality might listen. But maps don't show hunger. They don't show mud that swallows wagons whole, or the sound a man makes when he realizes his feet have frozen inside his boots. You keep walking. The rhythm of it becomes a kind of prayer. Left, right, please don't fall. The air smells of ash and animal sweat. Somewhere behind you, the sick are being left beside the road. They don't scream anymore. That's what scares you most, not the dying, but the quiet. The quiet in Russia is not ordinary quiet. It's thick, heavy, full of waiting. You can hear your own heartbeat in it, and sometimes it sounds like someone else's footsteps. One evening, you stop near a stretch of ruined cottages. The roofs have collapsed, and inside, frost grows on the walls like mold. You find a doll's head in the snow porcelain, cracked, eyes painted open. You put it down carefully, as if it might still be watching. The men search the ruins for food. They find turnips frozen solid, half a loaf of black bread turned to stone. Someone tries to break it with a bayonet and snaps the blade. A few laugh, though it sounds more like coughing. A rumor spreads. There's flour in a barn to the north. You go with a few others, trudging through drifts of ash and snow. The barn is there, yes, or what's left of it. Inside, sacks are torn open, the floor dusted white. For a moment you think it's flour, until you realize it's frost. Someone jokes that it's the same thing, both tasteless, both useless. You laugh too, because what else is there to do? The army moves again at dawn. The wind is sharper now, cutting through fabric, slicing its skin. Men wrap rags around their faces until they all look like mummies, anonymous and interchangeable. Horses stumble and don't get up. You've stopped naming them. Names belong to the living. The emperor rides ahead, wrapped in his gray coat like a shadow that learned to think. He still looks certain, though the certainty has cracks around the eyes. When he passes, men straighten their backs for a few seconds, pretending the world still makes sense. You hear him speak sometimes, his voice low and calm. He tells the marshals that the Russians will have to turn and fight soon, that no army can keep retreating forever. But the Russians keep proving him wrong. They fall back across rivers, across forests, across time itself. When you think you've cornered them, they vanish again, leaving only smoke, always smoke, curling up from villages set alight. It feels less like chasing an enemy than like being lured somewhere. You begin to dream of them. In your sleep, the Russians are not men, but shapes in the mist, tall as trees, faceless and wordless, pointing east. You follow because there is no west anymore. By September, the world begins to gray. The sky lowers. The air thickens. You start to taste metal on your tongue, though you can't say from what. The priests say it's a sign that God is turning the land against you. Others say it's just fatigue. You've stopped choosing between superstition and truth. Both taste the same when you're hungry. Each day, fewer men rise at reveille. Some don't wake because they're dead. Others because they've decided not to bother. The officers shout, threaten, promise it makes no difference. You can't discipline emptiness. One afternoon, you pass a field filled with black stumps. You think they're trees until you realize they're cannon barrels, half buried and frozen. A dozen wagons overturned nearby, horses stiff where they fell. The air hums with flies, even in this cold. The silence becomes unbearable. Men start talking just to fill it. They tell stories of home, of wives, of wine, of Paris, until the stories become the same fragments of warmth carried by frozen tongues. At night, you listen to the wind move through dead branches. It sounds almost like music, or maybe like a choir practicing for a funeral that hasn't finished yet. Napoleon grows uneasy. You can feel it in the way his orders come faster, more desperate. He's chasing ghosts now, rumors of supply caches, whispers of Russian divisions just beyond reach. He stares at the map each evening, his finger tracing lines that no longer exist. He says, "Here we will rest." And the land says, "No." You once believed he could command anything, men, weather, history itself. Now you watch him argue with geography. It's not a fair fight. His marshals are worried but polite. They say things like, "Majesty, the men need rest," or "The roads are worsening," and he waves them away. He's still brilliant, but brilliance means little against mud. There's a story that when one general complained about the cold, Napoleon said, "The cold is the same for everyone." You're not sure if that's true, but if it is, it's the cruelest joke he's ever told. Because the cold may be the same, but not everyone survives it. One night, the army camps beside a frozen river. The ice creaks beneath the wagons, groaning like a living thing. You lie awake, listening to it crack, waiting to be swallowed. You look up at the stars and try to count them, but there are too many, and your fingers are too numb. Somewhere in that infinite sky is Paris, still bright, still warm. It feels like another planet. Beside you, a man mutters in his sleep, calling for his mother. You don't wake him. There's nothing to say. The next morning, he's stiff and blue. Someone takes his boots. No one judges. The further you march, the less real the world becomes. The landscape flattens into repetition: snow, smoke, horizon, repeat. Even the air seems thinner, as if you're walking inside a painting that's being erased. Food is rationed by imagination now. You chew on frozen bread until your teeth ache, drink melted snow that tastes of ash. Your stomach feels like an echo chamber, empty but loud. Someone ahead of you collapses. No one stops. There's a rhythm to dying here, predictable, almost polite. You step around the bodies like puddles. Sometimes, at dusk, you think you see movement in the distance, figures gliding along the ridge, too far to tell if they're men or smoke. The Russians, perhaps. Or maybe just the land dreaming of them. Napoleon once said that space and time were his greatest allies. Now they have switched sides. Time stretches, space devours, and the emperor finds himself surrounded by the very weapons he once wielded. He doesn't admit it, but you can feel it, the trembling underneath his calm. He still rides tall, but his shadow wavers. The men notice. They always notice. You begin to wonder if this is what defeat feels like. Not sudden, not loud, but slow, creeping, disguised as endurance. And still, you walk, because there is no other direction left. When the first snowstorm hits, it's almost beautiful. The flakes fall softly, like forgiveness. The air turns quiet, muffled, kind. The men laugh and open their mouths to catch snow on their tongues. For a moment, it feels like peace. But by nightfall, the laughter dies. The snow thickens, the wind sharpens, and the cold reveals itself for what it is: not beauty, but judgment. Tents collapse under the weight of it. Fires die as soon as they're lit. The snow creeps into everything: blankets, boots, lungs. It doesn't melt anymore. You watch men curl beside their horses for warmth and never wake up. You watch officers argue over whose turn it is to die first. You stop feeling your fingers, then your feet, then the point of it all. Napoleon rides through the storm, his horse staggering, his face unreadable. He looks like a man carved from the same ice that surrounds him. For a second, you almost pity him, a genius, trapped in his own design, realizing too late that maps do not include mercy. The army keeps moving, though no one knows why. Perhaps momentum is easier than thought. You start to dream while walking. Sometimes you see Paris. Sometimes you see nothing at all. Both are equally comforting, and somewhere, beyond the snow, the Russians are still out there, invisible, waiting, patient. They don't need to fight. The winter is doing it for them. The snow doesn't stop. It falls like a verdict, day after day, smothering the horizon until even direction feels theoretical. You wake buried in white, shake it from your face, and find it already falling again. It's not violent. That's what makes it cruel. Violence you can fight. This is gentler, like drowning in silence. You used to think snow was beautiful. You don't anymore. Beauty implies mercy. This snow has none. It erases everything. It touches color, sound, memory. The world shrinks to the space between your heartbeat and the crunch beneath your boots. You've learned new ways to tell time. When you can see your breath, it's morning. When you can't, it's night. When your fingers stop hurting, it's too late. The army has become something less than an army. It's a rumor now, a shuffling line of shapes wrapped in rags and frost, moving west because west is the only word left that means home. No one sings anymore. You remember songs, vaguely tunes from France, from Poland, from Italy, but the lyrics freeze halfway up your throat. You stop thinking of the Russians as enemies. They've become something abstract, like gravity or hunger. You no longer hate them. You just envy them for being somewhere else. The wind howls across the plains, carrying no message, just sound. You could swear it whispers in a language older than war. Some men answer it. You've seen them step out of the line, smiling faintly, walk into the whiteness until they vanish. No one follows. You tell yourself they're deserters, but you know better. They've simply accepted the invitation that Russia keeps offering: rest. One morning, you wake to find your boots frozen to the ground. It takes you 10 minutes to pry them loose, and when you do, half your skin stays behind. You laugh because what else can you do? A laugh is lighter than a scream, and it burns fewer calories. You eat snow to trick your stomach. It works for a few minutes, until the cold inside matches the cold outside. Then it just hurts. Horses collapse every few miles. The ones that still stand look hollowed, haunted. The officers try to save them for the artillery, but the artillery's useless frozen wheels, jammed barrels, horses too weak to pull. The cannons stay behind like monuments to stupidity. You walk past them and think, one day, someone will dig these up and call them history. You hope they'll give them better names than you gave your friends. Napoleon still rides. Always that same gray coat, that same distant stare. But something has shifted. He doesn't look forward anymore. He looks down, as if counting the distance between himself and the ground. Rumor says he's ill. Others say he's planning something brilliant. He's always planning something brilliant. The brilliance is all that's left of him now. A flickering candle in a snowstorm. One of his marshals suggests turning south toward supplies. Napoleon shakes his head. We will reach Smolensk, he says. We will reorganize there. Smolensk. You've heard that name before months ago, back when maps still mattered. It feels like promising warmth to a dying man just to see his smile. The order spreads down the line. To Smolensk. You start walking again, because the alternative is stopping. And stopping is the same as dying. The landscape changes. Trees appear, thin and bare, reaching upward like bones. Ravens sit on their branches, black against the white, watching. You think of them as priests attending the slow funeral of an army. You trudge past fields buried under snow. Sometimes shapes stick out: hands, helmets, hooves. You don't look too closely. The snow gives them a kind of peace, and it's impolite to stare. At night, the fires burn blue from lack of wood. You huddle close anyway, feeling heat that doesn't reach your bones. The smoke stings your eyes, but it's a comforting sting, proof that you still have eyes. Men trade stories of Paris again, though no one believes them anymore. The city has become myth, like Atlantis, a place too good for the living. Someone asks, half joking, if the emperor dreams. You imagine he doesn't. Dreaming is for those who think they might wake up. When you finally reach Smolensk, it's not a city anymore. It's a skeleton of walls and ash. The granaries are empty, the wells frozen solid. You find bits of burnt bread, half a barrel of spoiled grain. The men fight over it anyway. You don't blame them. Hunger doesn't care about dignity. Napoleon stares at the ruins as if trying to will them back to life. He says something about regrouping, but the wind steals his words. The marshals nod, but their eyes say what no one dares to voice. There's nothing left to regroup. That night, the snow returns with vengeance. It falls sideways, in sheets that bite your face. You wrap your scarf tighter and dream of fire that doesn't exist. When morning comes, the road west is white and clean, as if it had never been walked. That's the cruelty of snow. It forgives nothing, but it covers everything. The retreat begins. You've seen men die before, but not like this. This isn't dying. It's dissolving. They don't fall in battle. They fade, quietly, politely, into the landscape. One by one, they step out of the line and lie down. And by the next morning, they are gone, absorbed into Russia's breath. The living stop noticing. Death has become background noise, like wind or footsteps. You can only mourn so many before the heart freezes too. Somewhere behind, the Russians are following, not attacking, just watching, like wolves waiting for the herd to slow. You sometimes glimpse their cavalry far away, silhouettes on ridges. They never come close. They don't have to. The emperor orders speed. You would laugh if you had the energy. Speed? You can barely lift your legs. The snow clings to your knees like chains. You think about the word retreat. It used to mean going home. Now it just means dying slower. By December, the cold has found its voice. It doesn't whisper anymore. It roars. The wind sounds like artillery, endless and personal. You pull your coat tighter and imagine it's armor. It isn't. Your breath freezes in your beard. Your fingers no longer feel like yours. You've stopped unbuttoning anything. It takes too long, and the air outside punishes hesitation. A man beside you loses his nose. It just turns black and falls off mid-sentence. He doesn't scream. He just keeps talking, as if nothing happened. You envy him that calm. The roads are filled with wreckage wagons, broken wheels, half-eaten horses. You step over them like stepping stones. At night, you sleep beside the dead for warmth. It helps. You don't talk about it. You've stopped praying. You don't think God minds. Napoleon still rides, though now his horse is thinner, its ribs visible even through the saddlecloth. He keeps his hands tucked in his coat. He doesn't speak much, except to mutter orders no one can carry out. Once, you see him pause and look back at the line of survivors, a ribbon of misery stretched across the snow. He looks smaller than you imagined a legend could be. He turns to one of his aides and says something you'll remember for the rest of your life. From the sublime to the ridiculous, there is only one step. You realize then that he knows. He knows the empire he built is collapsing, not from battle, but from cold and silence. And somehow, that knowledge doesn't make him smaller, it makes him human. You pity him for the first time. The retreat becomes chaos. Discipline vanishes. Men throw away muskets to carry food, food to carry blankets, blankets to carry nothing. The logic of survival is simple. Lighten everything except despair. You come to a frozen river, the Berezina. The bridges are gone. The Russians are closing in from behind. The emperor orders pontoons built. The engineers work with bare hands, hammers freezing to their skin. You watch from the bank as men cross, slipping, falling, disappearing under the ice. The screams are brief. The water is mercifully quick. When your turn comes, you run. The planks shake beneath you, slippery with blood and frost. You don't look down. You don't look back. You just run. Because stopping means history will forget you. When you reach the other side, you collapse. You're alive, technically. Napoleon watches the crossing in silence. When it's done, he removes his hat, perhaps in mourning, perhaps in disbelief. The bridges burn behind you. The fire glows red against the snow, the last warmth you'll see for a long time. After the Berezina, the army ceases to exist. There are only survivors now, scattered, skeletal, moving west in small knots. The Russians still follow, but even they seem tired of the chase. The emperor leaves the column, riding ahead with a small guard. Rumor says he's returning to Paris. You don't blame him. Someone has to tell the story, and history prefers its storytellers alive. When he's gone, the air feels emptier, as if even ambition has frozen solid. You walk for days without counting. You forget what date it is. Time no longer measures hours, it measures endurance. The snow deepens. The land flattens. The silence becomes complete. Sometimes, at dusk, you think you see the emperor's gray coat moving ahead of you, small, distant, steady. You know it's impossible, but you follow anyway. Everyone needs something to follow. And then, one morning, the wind stops. Just stops. You wake to a stillness so complete it hurts. No snow falling, no sound. Just pale light and breath hanging in the air. You stand there, dizzy, waiting for something to happen. It doesn't. You realize that Russia isn't fighting you anymore. It doesn't need to. You've already lost, not to soldiers or strategy, but to the quiet indifference of a world that doesn't care whether you exist. You look around at what remains of the Grand Armée: torn uniforms, sunken eyes, a handful of men too stubborn to die. You want to speak, but words feel unnecessary. You keep walking, because motion still feels like meaning. The land doesn't move. The sun rises, pale as bone, and for a moment you think it's watching. When the survivors finally cross back into Poland, no one cheers. There is no triumph, no ceremony, just the sound of boots on thawing mud and the faint, bewildered relief of still breathing. Of the 600,000 who began this march, fewer than 100,000 remain. Most of them will never march again. You look west homeward, technically, and realize that something inside you didn't survive, even if your body did. Napoleon will rebuild his armies, of course. He always does. But he will never rebuild this certainty. The world has grown colder, and so has history. The men call it the Russian campaign. Historians will call it a catastrophe. The land itself will call it Tuesday. And somewhere, far away, the snow continues to fall, soft, endless, indifferent. You listen to it for a while. It sounds almost like applause, or maybe laughter. You can't tell the difference anymore. By September, your march finally ends. After endless plains, frozen rivers, and ghost villages, the horizon at last breaks open, and there it is, Moscow. The holy city, the heart of Russia, the prize promised at the end of all this suffering. But it isn't what you imagined. You expect bells, shouting, gunfire, Anything but the city is silent, so silent it feels wrong. The only sound is the creak of leather and the crunch of boots over the ashen road. The air smells of burnt grain and something older, something sickly sweet, the smell of things people set on fire so no one else could have them. You enter Moscow not as a conqueror, but as a ghost who's arrived too late for his own funeral. The streets gape empty, windows shuttered, doors unbarred, chairs overturned. Smoke rises from the far quarters, not from battle but from deliberate destruction. The Russians have fled, but they've taken their hatred with them and left it smoldering behind. You pass a fountain filled with ashes, a church with its icons stripped away, a marketplace littered with broken barrels. Even the rats are gone. Someone whispers that the citizens poisoned the wells before they fled. You can't tell if it's true, but you don't drink. That night you make camp in a house that still has part of its roof. The wallpaper is peeling, the bed is gone, the air is damp. You find a child's wooden toy under the rubble, a small horse with one wheel missing. You keep it in your pocket, not sure why. The army spreads through the city like a tide looking for food, warmth, anything. But there is none. The Russians have taken it all. Wine cellars smashed, bakeries looted, storehouses bare. Even the animals are gone, slaughtered or driven off. You boil what you can find. Candle wax, flour swept from the floor, maybe a handful of oats if you're lucky. That night, music echoes faintly from somewhere down the street, a drunken soldier playing a looted piano. The notes wander through the ruins like ghosts looking for their owners. You laugh, because what else can you do? You tell yourself it's worth it. You've made it to Moscow. The emperor will be pleased. Surely, this is the end. The Tsar will beg for peace, and soon you'll be marching home beneath banners and praise. But dawn brings no peace envoys, only more smoke on the horizon. At first, you think it's just a few chimneys burning some careless soldier's fire, spreading through the wooden roofs. But then you hear the shouts. Incendiaries! Russians in disguise! Someone swears they saw men darting through the streets with torches. You climb to the window and see the glow, a faint red line at the edge of the city, swelling fast. Then another, and another. Soon the whole skyline flickers like the rim of a volcano. The wind changes, and suddenly everything is flame. Roofs roar open, walls crack and crumble, the night turns orange. The fire doesn't move, it hunts. It leaps from street to street, chasing oxygen and fear. You run with a bucket, but it's useless. Water boils before it leaves your hand. The noise is everywhere, screaming horses, exploding wine barrels, the tearing of wood. Somewhere, church bells ring on their own, as if warning heaven what's happening below. You see men trying to save their loot, dragging furniture, sacks of flour, icons stolen from altars only to drop them and flee when the heat overtakes them. One man laughs as his coat catches fire, then falls without a sound. From the Kremlin, the emperor watches. They say he stands on a balcony, his face lit orange by the flames, commanding guards to wet the walls, to protect the powder magazines. He wanted Moscow. Now he has it burning in his hands. For 3 nights, the fire eats the city. Lead melts from domes and rains down like molten snow. Glass explodes in showers of light. You press your sleeve to your mouth, but the smoke still claws at your lungs. The streets twist with heat rivers of flame curling around corners, swallowing homes, chapels, stables, everything. When it's finally over, Moscow doesn't look conquered. It looks erased. You wander through what's left. Streets you marched down days ago are gone, replaced by fields of charcoal. The smell is worse than anything you've ever known, not just wood and pitch, but cooked meat, leather, the sweetness of things that shouldn't burn but did. You step over blackened beams and find the remains of a church, half the wall still standing, an icon of Christ half melted but somehow still looking down at you. You wonder if he pities you or condemns you. Probably both. The emperor rides past. His horse's hooves kick up ash. He looks around at the destruction with something that isn't anger or sadness, but disbelief. You can almost read his thoughts. Is this what victory looks like? Later, you hear him speak softly, to no one in particular. This is what barbarism looks like. But you're not sure whose barbarism he means, the Russians or his own. That night, you find shelter in the shadow of a burned wall. The cold has returned, biting deeper now. Somewhere nearby, a soldier plays the same broken piano again, though half its keys are dead. The notes limp through the air, thin and trembling. You close your eyes, listening. You think about Paris, about warmth, about bread. You think about nothing. Snow begins to fall. You wake up one morning and the world is white. Not clean white, not holy white, just the pale color of death pretending to be beautiful. Snow has fallen across Moscow, and for a moment it softens the ruins, covering the charred bones of the city like a shroud meant to comfort the living. It doesn't. It only hides how empty everything has become. You rise from what used to be a floor, wrapped in a tattered cloak that smells of smoke and horse fat. Your breath clouds the air. A comrade beside you doesn't move. You nudge him once, twice. Still nothing. He's gone stiff in the night, frozen in the same position he fell asleep in, mouth open, eyes half shut, as if still trying to dream of France. You take his gloves. You have to. The city groans when the wind moves through it. Half-burnt shutters rattle. Loose tiles skitter down rooftops. A few soldiers stumble by, faces hollow, their uniforms crusted with frost and ash. Somewhere in the distance, a horse screams, the sound torn short, as if the air itself bites it away. Napoleon still waits. That's the rumor. He's in the Kremlin, surrounded by maps that mean nothing now. Lines of ink that once divided empires now just mark the places where men froze, or starved, or vanished. He's waiting for peace, they say. But peace doesn't come to places like this. You wait because you don't know what else to do. Orders are few. Food is gone, and even the firewood burns too quickly. Men wander the streets with glassy eyes, gnawing on strips of leather, praying for news. You hear them talk in whispers about home, about bread, about surrender. But the emperor's pride is colder than the snow, and so you keep waiting, waiting for an order that feels like salvation. At night you hear singing, faint, cracked voices drifting through the ruins, French soldiers trying to remember the tune of La victoire est à nous. Victory is ours. It sounds like a joke now. You smile anyway. Humor is cheaper than hope, and it still warms the chest a little. Then the rumors start. The Russians are coming back. Not to fight, but to watch you die. They move on the outskirts, unseen, burning villages ahead of your foragers, poisoning wells, scattering ashes in the path. The land itself turns hostile. Even the snow feels like it's conspiring against you, hiding the road, burying supplies, muting your footsteps so you can't tell if you're still moving forward or just circling into oblivion. One day you see him, Napoleon. He rides through the ruins like a ghost wrapped in velvet. His horse exhales clouds of frost, his coat dusted white with snow. You expect some great word, some divine command, but he says nothing. His eyes are gray and tired, his lips pressed thin. For the first time, he looks small. He stops before a burned church, its golden dome now black, and watches the crows circle above it. They are the only creatures thriving here. Someone mutters behind you, "The crows are loyal to no empire." You almost laugh, but the sound catches in your throat. The order comes at last. Not retreat, never that. It's called a strategic movement of the army toward winter quarters. That's what they write in the dispatch. But you know what it means. The emperor has realized what every frostbitten toe already knew. Moscow is not a prize, it's a punishment. You leave the city the same way you entered it, through smoke. The fires still smolder in a few places, twisting lazily like ghosts waving farewell. Behind you, Moscow sits like a burned-out candle, its wax melted into black pools of memory. The road west is long, and the snow deepens with every step. Wagons break, horses collapse, men stumble and vanish into the whiteness. You walk through a forest of dead trees, each one standing like a soldier who refused to fall. The silence grows unbearable. You start talking to yourself, to the air, to the ghosts walking beside you. Everyone does. You learn that death is not sudden here, it's gradual, polite. It asks for little things first. Your fingers, your toes, your sense of direction. Then it takes your will to keep walking. You see men sit down just for a moment and never rise again. You stop counting. Hunger becomes a kind of religion. You dream of bread the way monks dream of angels. One soldier swears he smelled stew near the river. Half the company follows him, only to find a frozen horse carcass, ribs cracked open by bayonets. They boil it anyway. You eat the soup and don't ask whose horse it was. At night, the stars burn sharp and close, cruelly clear. You wonder if someone back home is looking at the same sky. Maybe they are. Maybe they're warm. Maybe they've already buried you in their hearts. You realize after a while that the cold isn't just weather. It's something alive. It whispers. It learns. It knows where to strike. It slips through wool and flesh like a knife dipped in silence. You start to imagine it speaking. You came here uninvited. You burned our cities. Now feel what we feel. Some men curse Russia. Others curse the emperor. You don't bother with either. You just keep walking, because movement is the only prayer left. Somewhere along the endless white road, you see him again, Napoleon, wrapped in fur, riding a sleigh now instead of a horse. He passes you without looking, eyes fixed ahead, his face pale as wax. You wonder if he even remembers what victory feels like. They say he still believes he can make peace, that he's sending letters to the Tsar, that maybe the Russians will forgive. You'd laugh if your lips weren't frozen. Every day feels like a smaller version of the last. The snow deepens, the rations vanish, the road narrows until it's just a trail of footprints, half swallowed by wind. You see men walking barefoot, their boots left behind because frozen leather cuts like glass. You see others carrying wounded comrades until their own strength gives out. When the wolves come, they're not even afraid of you anymore. They walk beside the column, lean and patient, knowing they'll eat soon enough. One night, as you huddle by a dying fire, someone whispers that Moscow was never meant to be taken, that it was a trap, a mirage, a test. You think maybe he's right. Maybe the city was never a place at all, just a curse spelled out in smoke and fire, waiting for someone arrogant enough to claim it. By the time you cross the river back toward the west, the Grand Army is no longer grand. The drums are gone, the flags lost, the songs forgotten. What's left are fragments of men dragging themselves through the snow, their faces pale as parchment, their eyes hollowed out by the wind. You look back once, and Moscow is gone, swallowed by distance, by smoke, by the very air that seemed to conspire against you. It's hard to believe it was ever real. Maybe it was a fever dream, an illusion conjured by ambition and ended by frost. Napoleon rides ahead, silent, his empire melting behind him like wax under an invisible Sunday. And you, a soldier of what was once the greatest army in Europe, realize that history isn't written by the victors, it's written by the survivors, in footprints that the snow will soon erase. You keep walking, because what else is there to do? You keep walking, because that's all there is left to do. October arrives not with color, but with silence, a silence so sharp it cuts through the bones. The frost that once glittered prettily on branches now feels like a trap closing around the earth. The roads turn to glass, the rivers to mirrors, the air to knives. The warmth of Moscow, even its fire, is a memory fading behind you, swallowed by distance and smoke. The first real cold comes without warning. One morning you wake, and your breath doesn't rise as mist anymore, it falls like dust. The air itself feels heavy, thick with invisible teeth. You pull your coat tighter, but it doesn't help. It was made for summer campaigns, stitched for glory parades, not for this, not for Siberian wind. Men cough blood into scarves already stiff with frost. Horses stumble, their nostrils rimed with ice, their flanks trembling. When they fall, you don't bother helping them up. You know what happens next. A knife, a fire, and a brief, hot meal that no one speaks about afterward. Russia doesn't fight you anymore. It simply eats you, inch by inch. The villages you pass are already cinders, the wells poisoned, the barns stripped bare. Sometimes you find a few turnips buried in the snow, frozen hard as stones. You break your teeth trying to chew them anyway. You remember how you once marched to drums and songs, banners snapping in the wind. Now there are no drums, no songs, only the crunch of boots and the groan of wagons dragging the sick and the dying. Somewhere far behind, the Russian army follows unseen but always near, like wolves. They attack when you least expect it. A handful of horsemen out of the fog, a volley from the trees, then gone again. You fire into emptiness and wonder if you imagine them. Every night, when the fires die, you hear the real wolves, the four-legged kind. Their howls roll across the frozen plains like church bells tolling for the dead. Sometimes, when a man wanders too far from camp, the bells stop ringing. The rations, already small, turn impossible. Bread freezes so solid that knives break against it. You learn to hold the loaf under your armpit until the body heat softens it just enough to bite. It tastes of smoke, dirt, and regret. The men talk of home, of wine, of women, of sunlight that doesn't hurt to look at. You join in, though you can barely remember the color of France anymore. Everything has become white, gray, or gone. A captain tries to keep discipline still, calls roll, still shouts orders until one morning his voice simply cracks in the cold and he stops speaking. He walks with the rest after that, just another shadow among shadows. The emperor rides ahead somewhere. You've seen him once or twice, a dark shape on a white plain, small as an insect against the horizon. Rumor says he's calm, that he believes he can still save the army. Rumor lies. One dawn, you wake to find the man beside you frozen solid, still sitting upright, his eyes glazed over like marbles. You don't even bury him. There's no time, and the ground is too hard anyway. You just keep walking past him. More figures appear along the road, men who fell asleep standing, leaning on muskets and never woke up. They dot the landscape like strange new monuments, the statues of defeat. Someone jokes, weakly, that maybe the emperor should build a museum for them when he gets home. Nobody laughs. Your hands no longer feel like yours. When you look down, the skin is gray and cracked, your nails blackened. One man burns his fingers trying to light a fire and feels nothing. Another hacks off his boot with a bayonet, revealing toes like lumps of ice. You turn away before he starts cutting. At night, you huddle around fires that barely burn. You can hear the wood scream. It's so frozen that the sap inside explodes in tiny pops. You hold your hands out, and the heat feels like memory, faint and unreliable. Someone tells a story to keep spirits up, something about how the emperor once crossed the Alps with the same courage, how no winter could stop him. The man finishes his tale, smiles weakly, then topples over into the snow. By morning, he's stiff as a drum. You carry on, always west, always toward the promise of France. But the road seems to stretch instead of shorten, like time itself has frozen and refuses to let you leave. Then come the rivers, frozen in parts, flowing black in others, traps laid by nature herself. The first bridge collapses under the weight of wagons. Men and horses tumble into the icy water. The screams last only seconds before turning into silence. The next time you cross, it's over a bridge made of them, bodies frozen in place, used as planks by those still living. No one prays anymore. Even God seems to have deserted the field. Somewhere behind you, cannon fire echoes the Russians again, snatching at the edges of the retreat. You don't run. You can't. You just keep walking, each step an argument against despair. The cold begins to play tricks. You see warmth where there is none, a glow in the distance that turns out to be sunrise on snow, or maybe just hallucination. You start talking to people who aren't there. One night, you wake to find yourself walking toward the east instead of west. You don't remember turning around. Someone near you starts laughing wild, high, uncontrollable. It's contagious. Soon a dozen men are laughing at nothing, tears freezing to their cheeks. For a moment, it almost feels good to laugh at the absurdity of it all. You're a moving comedy of death, a marching joke that no one will tell because no one will survive to tell it. One afternoon, as the sun drags low and pale, you see him again, Napoleon, standing by a frozen river, staring at the horizon. He looks smaller than ever, his face drawn tight by the wind. No crown, no glory, just a man wrapped in too many coats. He turns and meets your eyes, or maybe he looks past you. For a heartbeat, you both understand the same truth, that this isn't war anymore. It's erasure. He says something to his officers, too low to hear, then mounts his sleigh and disappears into the white. The men start calling him names behind his back now. The Frost King, the little Iceman. Gallows humor keeps them human. You even manage a smile. By November, the wolves grow bolder. They follow in daylight now, padding just beyond musket range. Sometimes you see their eyes yellow, intelligent, patient. They're waiting for the army to finish what it started. When someone falls behind, no one looks back. The howls start almost immediately, then fade, then start again. You begin to think of them as part of the march, like drums used to be. Rhythm of the retreat. You reach Smolensk again, or what's left of it. The city you passed on the way east is now a graveyard of rubble and ash. You find a little food, a little rest, but no safety. Disease has come ahead of you: dysentery, fever, frostbite. The hospital smells of rot and hopelessness. A surgeon cuts off limbs by the dozens, piling them like firewood. When the firewood runs out, someone burns the limbs. You watch from outside, too tired to feel horror. Rumor says the emperor still believes he can rally the army here. But the army no longer exists. It's just fragments of men pretending they still belong to something. You stop thinking in words after a while. Cold replaces vocabulary. Hunger becomes punctuation. Every sensation translates into a single truth: survive. You walk through days without knowing the date, through nights without dreaming. You measure time by who falls behind and who doesn't. One evening, you find yourself staring at your reflection in a frozen puddle. The face looking back is cracked, colorless, eyes sunken. You don't recognize him. You don't want to. One morning, an officer divides the final loaf among 20 men. You get a piece the size of a coin. Someone jokes it's the emperor's generosity in miniature. No one laughs this time. You chew slowly, pretending it's enough. The horizon stays blank. You start to believe the world ends just beyond it. Maybe that's what hell is: a horizon that never changes, a road that never ends, a hunger that never dies. And still, you keep walking. You keep walking, because motion is the only proof you're still alive. The wind howls behind you like a chorus of ghosts, a long, unbroken note that vibrates in your ribs. Somewhere in that sound are the voices of men you knew, friends, commanders, boys who joked about Paris, and now lie stiff in the drifts. Every few miles you pass them, bodies half buried, faces pale as moonlight, frozen mid-gesture. One clutches a loaf of bread that shattered in the cold. Another still holds a musket, bayonet pointed at nothing. They look peaceful, as if sleep simply forgot to end. Word spreads down the line like rumor in a graveyard. A river ahead, the Berezina. Beyond it, safety. Beyond it, the West. The word France feels almost magical when someone whispers it, as if saying it could summon warmth. But the river isn't merciful. It's a wide black wound in the landscape, half frozen, half flowing, all death. The bridges are gone, burned by retreating Russians. On the opposite bank, enemy guns wait like vultures. You arrive just before dawn. The air bites so hard it hurts to breathe. The engineers work through the night, sawing ice, hammering wood, their hands bleeding through rags. Every sound, the crack of timber, the hiss of saws, echoes like a prayer to physics. Someone mutters, "We crossed the Niemen like gods. We'll cross this one like ghosts." By morning, two narrow bridges stand fragile skeletons over black water. They sway with every gust. The first men to cross disappear into mist. Some make it, others slip, vanish under the ice. You tell yourself you won't be one of them. When your turn comes, you step onto the planks. The wood moans. Beneath you, water snarls. A cannonball hits somewhere close, cold spray. Screams. Then silence. You don't look down. You just move. Halfway across, the bridge shakes under the weight of panic. A horse collapses, dragging a wagon after it. The bridge dips. Men tumble, shouting. You cling to the rope, boots slipping, until a hand grabs yours, someone you don't know, someone who'll die an hour later. You never forget that grip. On the far bank, you collapse into the snow. You made it. You're shaking so hard your teeth sound like musket fire. Around you, survivors crawl out of the mist, coughing, gasping, eyes wild. Behind you, the bridge still groans under the living, and then, with one last cry of wood and water, it breaks. The screams stop quickly. The Berezina closes over them, smooth and indifferent. What's left of the army, if it can still be called, that moves on. No ranks, no flags, just a long, ragged procession of shadows dragging their own history behind them. You think the worst is over, you're wrong. The snow deepens until it swallows the road. The wind rises again, flaying faces raw. Frostbite takes hands, feet, voices. Men speak less, not from discipline, but because words cost heat. When someone falls, no one stops. You step around them gently, as if not to disturb their sleep. The mind begins to thaw in strange directions. You dream while awake. You see fields of wheat where there's only ice. Hear church bells from invisible towns. Sometimes you imagine you can smell bread, and you follow the scent off the road until someone drags you back. At night, you huddle beside a fire made of splintered muskets and fragments of wagons. The flames are blue from burning varnish. You stare into them and think of home, how the fire there was yellow, how it didn't smell of war. Someone next to you says quietly, "When we get back, they'll make songs about us." You nod. But you both know that no song could survive this silence. Rumor spreads that the emperor has gone ahead, leaving the army to save what's left of France. No one knows if it's true, but everyone believes it. The myth of him, unbreakable, invincible, crumbles like frost on glass. Some curse his name. Others defend him. You don't bother with either. You've stopped believing in men altogether. Only the cold keeps its promises. By December, the sun barely rises. The sky is a dull bruise that never heals. When the wind drops, you hear the snow itself moving, settling, sighing, covering tracks. You cross villages without names, houses stripped to frames. Once, you find a barn still standing. Inside are a few dying horses. One of them nuzzles your sleeve, searching for food. You whisper, "There's nothing left," and the animal seems to understand. It lowers its head and doesn't lift it again. Outside, a soldier finds a bottle of brandy frozen solid. He smashes the glass, eats the ice like candy, laughs until he chokes. For a moment, everyone else laughs too. It's the last laughter you hear that winter. The night before the border, the wind stops. The air hangs heavy, almost kind. The sky clears, and the stars come out in cruel abundance, thousands of them, sharp as bayonets. You lie awake, too cold to sleep, watching the constellations spin. You try to remember their names: Orion, Cassiopeia, the Great Bear, the same stars that watched Hannibal, Caesar, Alexander. All of them men who thought the world could be bent by will alone. All of them dust now. You wonder if this is what victory looks like from the stars, tiny fires flickering on an endless sheet of white. Someone beside you murmurs, "Tomorrow we'll see Poland." You don't answer. You've learned not to trust tomorrows. Morning. The sky is iron, the wind mercifully weak. You cross into Poland almost without noticing a frozen ditch, a marker stone half buried in snow. There's no cheer, no anthem, no drums. Just the sound of boots dragging through slush. Someone whispers, "We're home." You look around at the survivors, gaunt, limping, wrapped in rags and silence. Home looks nothing like this. When they count later, they'll say 500,000 entered Russia. Fewer than a tenth came back. Numbers so large they lose meaning until you remember a face, a voice, a hand that once gripped yours on a bridge over black water. Then the number feels smaller than grief. They'll call it a campaign. You'll call it winter. Years later, in taverns and barracks, men will tell stories. How the emperor rode through fire. How the army endured the impossible. They'll make it sound glorious. You'll let them. No one wants to hear how defeat really feels. Slow, quiet, white. When people ask, "What was it like?" you'll shrug and say, "Cold." That word will carry everything, the hunger, the loss, the silence. Sometimes, when snow falls back home, you stand by the window and watch it. You see the flakes drift down softly, beautifully, and for a heartbeat you remember the endless plain, the bodies, the wolves, the river. Then you close the shutters and sit by the fire, hands outstretched to the warmth, still half expecting it to vanish. History will call it a retreat. You'll know better. It wasn't retreat. It was survival, one frozen heartbeat at a time. And as the fire crackles, you think, the cold kept its word. But so did we. You survived. For whatever that's worth, you think the worst is over when the border vanishes behind you, but winter is not finished yet. It follows like an idea that refuses to die. The wind still hunts you. The cold still speaks. It whispers through torn uniforms and split boots, reminding you that survival does not mean victory. The army is no longer an army. It's a rumor, limping west. 600,000 became 100,000. 100,000 will become fewer, still before the thaw. The rest are scattered across the white world, a new geography made of bones. You hear it first as gossip. The emperor has gone. No fanfare, no farewell, just gone a sleigh cutting through the night toward Paris. At first, you don't believe it. He wouldn't leave, you tell yourself. He promised glory, promised to share your fate. But rumors have a way of turning true when the world is this cold. You imagine him hunched in that sleigh, wrapped in fur, eyes hollow, racing west through frozen villages. Each mile he puts between himself and the army must feel like breathing again. For you, each mile is another lungful of frost. When the news finally reaches the stragglers, no one curses. No one has the strength. The betrayal feels like weather, something expected, inevitable. You simply nod and keep walking. He rushes back to a France that doesn't know yet, to ministers still polishing medals, to Parisians reading newspapers that speak of triumph. He'll tell them the campaign was a success, that the army needs rest, that Russia is humbled. He'll tell them winter fought unfairly. You can almost hear him rehearsing it, words misting the air inside the sleigh. It was not men who defeated me. It was nature herself. Maybe he's right. Maybe winter is the only general who never loses. Behind him, the survivors dragged themselves across Poland and Prussia, leaving a trail of broken muskets, burned wagons, and unburied memories. Villages close their doors when you pass. They've seen enough ghosts for one lifetime. You trade whatever's left, buttons, knives, even epaulets for a crust of bread. The locals look at you with pity and fear, as if contagion has a uniform. At night, you dream of warmth and wake to frost. The fire you build collapses into smoke before dawn. It feels personal, as if the elements themselves have learned your name. Back in Paris, the salons glitter again. Candles, laughter, talk of honor. They paint you all as heroes, the ones who marched to the edge of the world and came back with frostbite for medals. You'd laugh if your lips weren't cracked. The emperor arrives like a ghost who refuses to admit he's dead. Crowds cheer, though no one quite knows why. He bows slightly from his carriage, eyes sunken, smile brittle. You watch from the crowd, unrecognizable in your own uniform, and realize something strange. The people still believe. They want the dream more than the truth. You think, maybe that's why he came back, to feed them one last illusion before the thaw. He summons what remains of his generals. Around a glittering table, maps unroll again, thin paper over thick denial. They speak of rebuilding, of new campaigns. You picture the rivers of ice, the dead frozen where they stood, and wonder how men can forget so quickly. He points at a line on the map, tracing his finger west to east. His hand shakes only a little. Next time, he says, we'll be prepared for winter. You want to laugh, but instead you feel tired, the kind of tired that sinks deeper than sleep. When you finally reach home, no one recognizes you. The mirror doesn't either. You're smaller somehow, hollowed out by distance. People ask what Russia was like. You answer, cold. They nod as if that explains everything. You sit by the hearth, watching firelight dance on the walls, and wonder how warmth can feel so violent after so much absence. You still wake at night to the sound of wind under the door, heart racing as if the snow is coming back for you. Sometimes you dream you're still walking endless white ahead, nothing behind. When you wake, you're grateful for walls, but the gratitude fades quickly. The newspapers print stories about valor and endurance. Pain becomes poetry. Loss becomes legend. You're proud for half a second, then ashamed of that pride. The emperor tells France that the campaign proved his genius, that he fought not just men but nature itself. The people cheer again, louder, almost convincing themselves. He needs the myth to survive. They need it too. Empires are built from stories, and stories burn cleaner than corpses. You watch him ride through Paris, the crowd chanting his name as snow begins to fall, the first snow of the new year. He looks up, sees the flakes, and for an instant his face changes. Maybe he remembers what they can do. You want to shout, "Don't look away, sire. It's still there. It never left." But the wind carries your breath away before the words form. The cold lingers in you like a habit. You walk slower now, always listening for the crunch of ice underfoot. When winter returns, you prepare your fire days early. Hoard food as if Moscow still waits beyond the forest. Neighbors call it superstition. You call it education. When the snow falls thick and silent, you stare into it and feel both terror and tenderness. It's beautiful, Yes, but beauty, you've learned, doesn't care if you survive it. You hear talk of war again, of new enemies, new maps. Young men brag that they want to march where you marched. You tell them the truth that the road east isn't a road at all, but a mouth that swallows armies. They laugh politely, thinking you exaggerate. You wish them luck, though what you mean is goodbye. And when they're gone, you sit by the window and watch the snow start to fall again, quiet as a verdict. Understood. Months pass, but time doesn't heal, it only forgets. You watch Paris pretend it remembers nothing. The salons hum again. The chandeliers glitter like captured stars. Music swells through rooms that smell of wax and ambition. It's as if Moscow never burned, as if the snow never spoke your name. You find yourself in a tavern one evening, surrounded by men in clean uniforms who never left France. They toast the emperor, their glasses ringing like musket fire in miniature. One of them turns to you and says, "You were there, weren't you? Tell us, what was Russia like?" You stare into your drink, the pale liquid rippling as if trying to form an answer. "Cold," you say again. They laugh, expecting a story. You give them none. Because how do you explain a place where fire freezes, where silence kills louder than cannon? You let them fill the gaps with imagination. Their fantasy is kinder than your truth. The newspapers still call it a campaign of genius. Each defeat becomes a maneuver, each corpse an example of endurance. The editors ink victory out of failure, transforming starvation into strategy. You read one article that claims the emperor retired gracefully from Moscow. You almost choke on your bread, the first soft bread you've eaten in months. Even the artists get involved. Paintings appear in shop windows. Napoleon astride a rearing horse under a crimson sky, cape fluttering, sword raised. In the background, Moscow gleams untouched, snow like silk, not one brushstroke of ruin. You stand before the painting for a long time. People around you murmur in admiration. Someone says, "Look how the Russians tremble before him." You say nothing. You think about how the only thing that trembled out there was your hand, trying to light one more useless fire. Paris moves on quickly. It must. That's how cities survive their kings. But you can't. Every cold breeze on the Seine feels like a ghost leaning against your shoulder. Every church bell sounds like ice cracking. You wander the streets at night, half hoping to see someone from the march, a familiar limp, a voice calling your name. Instead, you see veterans begging under lamplight, their uniforms tattered, their medals pawned for bread. You leave coins when you can, guilt heavier than the metal. Sometimes you pass a bakery window and watch the steam roll out. The smell makes your knees weak. You remember burning flour just to taste something that wasn't snow. Now, abundance feels obscene. By spring, talk of war returns. Austria this time, or maybe Prussia again. It's hard to keep track. The emperor rides through the city in a new uniform, gleaming, untarnished. The crowd still cheers, though softer now, like applause for a play that's gone on too long. He waves as if nothing happened, as if Moscow were just a rehearsal for another act. "The campaign of 1812, he says in one speech, was glorious in its trials." You hear it quoted in the market and nearly laugh. Glorious in its trials. That's one way to describe frostbite. Weeks later, a package arrives at your door. A bundle of letters recovered from the retreat, undelivered, unread, unsent. Among them, one addressed to you. The handwriting is familiar. A friend who shared your fire that first night outside Moscow. The letter ends mid-sentence. The ink fades halfway through a word, as if frozen there forever. You read it again and again, trying to imagine what the last word was. Hope, maybe, or hunger. You keep the letter in your coat pocket. Every time winter wind brushes your chest, you touch it like a talisman. When December returns, Paris complains about the chill. Ladies wrap furs tighter. Coachmen curse the ice on cobblestones. You almost smile. If only they knew. One night, snow begins to fall, thick and slow. You walk out to the square and let it settle on your shoulders. For a moment you're back there, the endless plain, the sky low and merciless. You close your eyes and feel the cold crawling into your bones again, the way an old song crawls back into memory. Someone nearby laughs, a warm, happy sound. You open your eyes and remember where you are. Not Russia, not the retreat, but Paris, the city that never freezes long enough to learn. In the marketplace, you meet another survivor. You recognize him by the limp, the hollow cheeks. He grins when he sees you, though his teeth are few now. Still breathing, he says. Barely, you answer. You share a drink, a silence, a memory too heavy for words. When he leaves, he turns back and says, "It's strange, isn't it? We came back, but we didn't really return." He's right. Part of you was still out there on that white road, between the burning city and the river of ice, walking forever. You see him once more, months later, at a parade. He looks older, smaller. The medals on his chest shine too brightly, as if compensating for something that can't be restored. The crowd cheers, but their eyes wander. He raises his hand, and for a heartbeat you imagine he's saluting you not as emperor to soldier, but as one survivor to another. Then he turns away, swallowed by drums and ceremony. You realize then that he's become his own monument. Marble on the inside, hollow underneath. You dream often of a museum. No one will ever build halls lined with statues of men frozen mid-stride, horses captured mid-fall, fires locked in crystal. In the center, a single exhibit, a loaf of bread turned to stone. The plaque would read, "Victory 1812. Visitors would walk through quietly, shivering though the room is warm. They'd exit whispering, not sure what they'd just seen, a warning, a memory, or a mirror. You wake laughing, then crying, because maybe you'd buy a ticket too. There's humor in it still, if you know where to look. A man who survived on boot soup now runs a cobbler's shop. "I still cook leather," he jokes, showing you a perfectly new pair of shoes. Another sells candles, saying he owes his life to wax. "It burns better than wood," he winks. You laugh, genuinely this time. There's comfort in absurdity, the only luxury the cold left you. Years pass. Wars continue, as they always do. But each winter, no matter where you are, you feel it watching. The cold has become a memory that breathes. When the first frost touches the windows, you whisper, "I remember," and the glass fogs in reply. Sometimes, late at night, you imagine winter itself as an old general sitting by a fire, polishing medals made of snowflakes. He smiles, because he never needs to march. His victories come to him. He doesn't raise armies or flags. He waits. And when men forget humility, He rises again, quiet, inevitable, absolute. You met him once, out there in the endless white. You know his face. When word comes years later that the emperor has fallen, exiled to an island surrounded by water instead of snow, you don't cheer. You just nod, as if history finally caught up with the weather. You imagine him there, pacing the shore, staring out at the horizon, seeing not sea, but an ocean of frozen memory stretching east. Perhaps he hears the wind still calling his name in Russian. You raise a glass, not in hatred or loyalty, but in recognition. To the only general who never surrendered, you whisper, "To winter." The glass clinks softly, like ice breaking in a distant river. You never escape it, not really. Even now, when the fire burns bright and the room is safe, you can feel the faint chill beneath your skin. The body warms, the memory does not. But there's peace in that too. The frost taught you something no emperor ever could, that silence is stronger than command, that endurance outlives glory. You smile, close your eyes, and let the old dream return, the endless plain, the soft falling snow, the whisper of boots fading into distance. It doesn't hurt anymore. The world turns white, and you sleep. You never thought winter had a voice. You were wrong. It begins softly, one night in January, when the wind outside your house stops roaring and starts to hum, a low, patient sound, almost like a sigh pressed against the window. You stir from sleep, half dreaming, and realize the frost isn't just settling, it's whispering, not in words, but in memory. It says, "You remember me." And you do. You've seen him before, not as a man, but as a presence. The night sky was his cloak, the frozen river his sword, the silence his command. He never shouted orders, never wrote dispatches. He simply arrived. And when he did, armies stopped. You understand now what the emperor never did. That winter was never an obstacle. It was an enemy, one with patience instead of pride. It waited for footsteps, for sweat, for exhaustion. Then it struck without lifting a finger. You hear its voice again, older than empires. You came to conquer. I came to remind you the world cannot be owned. You don't answer. There's nothing to say to a god made of absence. The historians will write their books neat paragraphs, numbers in the margins. They'll talk of supply lines and strategy, of bridges and battles. They'll give the disaster a name, a chapter, a date. But you know the truth. The campaign didn't end at Berezina or Moscow. It ended in the moment when fire refused to burn, when the breath of men turned solid and fell like snow. That was the coronation. That was when Winter became a general. He ruled without subjects, commanded without words. He didn't need maps. The land itself obeyed him. Forests became fortresses, rivers became traps. The very air turned traitor. No man ever defeated him. The only victories against Winter are temporary, measured in hours, not eras. You wonder sometimes if the frost remembers every face it claimed. The drifts of snow out there, maybe they aren't just snow. Maybe they're archives. Beneath each white mound, a name, a heartbeat, a story stopped mid-sentence. When the wind sweeps across the steppe, you imagine it reading those names aloud in a voice no one but the stars can hear. Maybe that's why it's so quiet in Russia. The silence isn't empty. It's full of history humming beneath the ice. You still carry that half-finished letter in your pocket. You unfold it sometimes and trace the frozen ink with your finger. The last word still ends abruptly, as if interrupted by weather. You think maybe it's better that way. Some words are too heavy to survive the cold. If he'd finished the letter, what would he have said? That he believed you'd both make it home? That the emperor would keep his promise? Or just something simple, human, like, stay warm? The paper cracks when you fold it back. It sounds like thin ice giving way. You dream more often now, not nightmares, exactly, but something close. In your sleep, you see fires that won't catch, men crouched around embers that glow and die. Their faces blur into smoke, their laughter thin and tired. You wake shivering, though the hearth beside you still burns. You add another log, watch the sparks rise, and whisper, stay, just stay. The flames dance uncertainly, as if considering the request. You've learned to never take warmth for granted. Every degree above freezing feels like mercy. France has long since moved past the winter of 1812. There are new wars, new flags, new songs. Children play in snow, that means nothing to them. You watch from your window as they toss handfuls of it, laughing, shrieking, turning the battlefield into a playground. You almost envy them. To see snow as joy instead of judgment, that's a kind of innocence you'll never get back. A mother calls her child inside before sunset, voice bright and careless. Come in before you catch cold. You smile. If only she knew what that phrase once meant. One morning, you receive an invitation of veterans gathering at the Hôtel des Invalides. A banquet, they say, to honor the survivors of the Russian campaign. You go, though your hands shake when you button the coat. Inside, the room glows golden. Candles flicker. Wine flows. The air smells of roast meat and nostalgia. Men with missing limbs and faraway eyes raise their glasses to each other. Some laugh too loudly. Others stare into nothing. The speeches come. Words like courage, sacrifice, glory. The phrases sound heavy, ornate, as if covered in frost themselves. You drink quietly, tasting ashes in the wine. Then an old general stands, his voice cracked but proud. We endured what no army ever has. Even the elements rose against us. You whisper into your cup, the elements didn't rise, we fell. No one hears. Maybe that's for the best. Years later, you hear he's gone, the emperor, dead in exile. They say the sea took him this time, not the snow. The same lesson, different element. You picture him on that island, staring into the horizon, still trying to command the wind. You wonder if he ever dreamt of Moscow, of the night the city turned to fire. You hope he did, not out of malice, but because forgetting would be worse. They bring his body back to Paris decades later, in a coffin of mahogany and myth. The streets fill again. The cheers sound familiar. History, it seems, freezes to repeating itself under a different Sunday. You don't go to the ceremony. You stay home, watching flakes drift past the window. When one lands on your palm, it melts instantly. You smile. You win again, you think. If winter could speak to mankind, it would not scold. It would only shrug and say, I am what I am. You were warned. It doesn't hate warmth. It simply waits for arrogance. It's patient, older than ambition, indifferent to flags. Empires rise in its off-season, But every empire ends the same way, breath turning to steam, armies fading into frost. You realize, with a quiet satisfaction, that the truest map of power isn't drawn in ink but in temperature. Sometimes, on the coldest nights, you step outside just to feel it again. The sting on your cheeks, the air sharp enough to taste. For a moment, you're back there not as a soldier, but as a witness to something vast and unbending. You whisper into the wind, "You won." And somewhere in the distance, a faint sound answers, not quite a voice, more like snow settling on snow. Maybe it's agreement, maybe it's forgiveness. Either way, you bow your head. A neighbor sees you once, standing barefoot in the snow. He laughs, calls you mad. "You'll freeze," he shouts. You grin. "Not likely. We've already met." He doesn't understand, but that's all right. Some jokes are made for ghosts. In your final years, you find silence comforting. It reminds you of the plains, endless, pure, uncluttered by words. People fear silence, fill it with chatter or music. You don't. You know, silence is not emptiness. It's remembrance without sound. You sit by the window, the last candle burning low. Snow falls again, slow and gentle. You close your eyes and feel it through the glass. That familiar chill, that ancient patience. You think, so here you are again, old friend. And if winter could answer, perhaps it would say, "I never left." History will call it Napoleon's failure, Russia's triumph, Europe's turning point. But you know better. None of them won. The only victor never marched, never retreated, never negotiated. Winter doesn't need parades. Its victory is carved into memory, invisible medals pinned to frostbitten skin, songs unsung but not forgotten. Somewhere, on a night like this, the snow is falling over the old road again. The bones have long since vanished, but the shape of that suffering remains, pressed into the land like a signature. The wind hums the tune of it, a long, slow lullaby in the language of absence. And as you listen, eyes closing, breath slowing, you realize the truth that the emperor never could. That some generals lead men, and some simply wait. Winter waited, and in the end, you marched for him. No bullet struck him that winter. Yet something greater defeated him: distance, time, and the quiet indifference of nature. You realize at last that this is how most empires end. Not in flame and glory, not in the crash of drums and banners, but in the slow settling of snow upon ambition. There's a moment after every storm when the world stops to listen to itself. After Moscow burned, after the cannons froze, after men became monuments of ice, that silence was the truest thing left. You were there. You felt it. The air itself seemed hollow, the kind of quiet that doesn't soothe but judges. Even the crows didn't caw, they just watched. Later, historians will fill that silence with words: strategy, logistics, retreat, defeat. But none of those fit. What really happened was simpler. The world reminded one man how small he was. Napoleon had crossed half the earth, believing he could bend weather, geography, even destiny to his will. And for a while, it looked like he could. Empires tend to believe their own myths until the universe shrugs. You think about the uniforms, those blue coats made for parades, stitched for warm days and swift victories. They were beautiful once. They looked good in paintings. They looked foolish in snow. Maybe that's the story of civilization. Humanity keeps showing up to eternity in the wrong clothes. The emperor's men marched with polished boots and polished pride, certain that human will could outshine winter. They were wrong, but gloriously so. There's something almost noble about that kind of ignorance, like moths applauding the candle before it kills them. The Russian winter didn't rage, it waited. It didn't need thunder or fury. Patience was its weapon. It simply outlasted. Every snowflake was a whisper saying, "You don't belong here." Every frozen river was a polite refusal. And still they marched, men of science, reason, empire, into a land that answered reason with silence. You imagine the frost, watching them, amused. The rivers, holding their reflections like open graves. The wind laughing softly into their collars. Humor lives even in disaster. You can almost hear the frost saying, "So you came to conquer? How charming! Stay a while." When spring finally came, it found an empire dissolved. The once mighty Grand Armée was gone, its colors buried under the thaw. The snow melted quietly, revealing what was left: broken wagons, blackened bones, and the shape of defeat carved into the mud. France would rebuild. Of course, empires always do. They rebrand collapse as resilience, loss as learning. But something invisible stayed behind on those plains, the ghost of arrogance cooling into humility. No bullet killed Napoleon that winter, but something inside him froze solid, the certainty that the world would always obey. Centuries later, people will still tell his story. They'll write books, build statues, argue over maps, but if you listen closely, every retelling carries a chill. Somewhere behind the marble and the medals, you can still hear the snow falling. That's the real monument. Not the column in Paris, not the tomb under Les Invalides, but the memory of a white field under a gray sky, and a man realizing that the world doesn't care how brilliant he is. You see, history doesn't hate arrogance. It just waits for it to trip. You look at your own hands, scarred, stiff, still trembling in memory. You think about how much of history was written by hands just like these. Cold, cracked, hopeful, terrified. Empires talk about destiny, but it's always carried out by fingers that can barely feel. Every banner was held by someone hungry. Every command was written by someone shivering. The truth is, history isn't strong, it's fragile and temporary. It's a campfire in a blizzard, a song half remembered. Humanity builds its towers and declares them eternal, but eternity has a way of yawning and covering them with dust or snow. If winter had a motto, it would be, "Wait long enough, and pride will kneel." The frost doesn't rush. It has centuries to make its point. When men build empires, winter simply checks its calendar and smiles. You remember that smile, cold, elegant, pitiless but fair. It treated soldiers and emperors the same. The frost didn't know rank. Maybe that's why it frightened Napoleon so deeply. It was the one enemy he couldn't command. You can picture him in that sleigh, racing west, clutching his cloak as if warmth could still be negotiated. Behind him, an empire dissolving. Ahead, a throne built on denial. And above him, the same indifferent stars that once watched Caesar freeze in Gaul. Every age forgets what the last one learned. The snow melts, the grass grows, and people convince themselves they're wiser than their ancestors. Then winter returns and proves otherwise. You can already imagine the next empire: newer uniforms, shinier boots, the same overconfidence. Different flags, same mistake. Because in the end, no one conquers cold, no one conquers distance, and no one conquers time. You laugh softly at the thought, the sound of a survivor who's seen the punchline. History is funny if you listen properly. It keeps repeating the same joke, just changing the actors. It lets men believe they're immortal until their breath fogs in the air. Napoleon once said, "Imagination rules the world." Perhaps, but winter rules imagination. It freezes it solid, chisels it into statues, and lets poets do the rest. You picture the frost as an artist, sculpting ruin into elegance, painting silence across the landscape, signing its name in the language of shivers. Now, so many years later, the fields of Russia are quiet again. Children play where armies fell. Farmers plow through history without knowing it. When the first snow arrives each year, it covers everything evenly: cities and graves, dreams and dirt, impartial as mercy. Somewhere under that white blanket lies the shape of the Grand Armée, pressed into the earth like the imprint of a vanished constellation. You think about how small that army seems now, compared to the expanse of time. The earth barely remembers. The wind certainly doesn't. But the silence does. Silence remembers everything. You're older now. You've told the story 100 times, and each time it sounds less like tragedy and more like truth. You stopped blaming anyone years ago. The emperor was only human. So were you. Maybe that's the point, not punishment, but proportion. The world reminded you what you were made of: skin, bone, water, breath, elements as temporary as snow. And when you finally understood that, the cold didn't feel cruel anymore. It felt honest. There's an absurdity to survival. You've outlived an empire, and for what? To sit by a fire and tell stories about frostbite? You chuckle, because that's all that's left: laughter and memory. Both fleeting, both warm for a moment. You think of all those grand speeches about destiny, the maps drawn in candlelight, the oaths of victory shouted into the wind. Then you picture the same men, trousers frozen to their legs, trading medals for mittens. If there's wisdom in history, it's that irony always keeps its promises. Distance destroyed Napoleon as surely as the cold. He could conquer cities, but not miles, command men, but not months. The world is wide, and pride is small. Time, too, took its turn. Empires, after all, are just performances on the stage of centuries. When the curtain of winter fell, the applause was silence. And maybe that's fitting. Silence is the only audience big enough for history. Outside your window now, snow drifts again, slow, patient, soundless. It's the same snow, perhaps, that once fell on Moscow, on the Berezina, on the road home. The same snow that once whispered your name. You watch it land on the sill, one flake at a time, perfect and temporary. For a moment you think of all the names it has buried: emperors, kings, ambitions, and how quietly it performs its work. Snow doesn't hate, it equalizes. It teaches humility without cruelty. It covers everything, and in doing so, forgives it. You lean back, close your eyes, and hear that faint echo again: the rhythm of boots in snow, the sigh of wind across a frozen plain. But it's soft now, almost kind. You think, no bullet struck him that winter, yet something greater defeated him: distance, time, and the quiet indifference of nature. And you understand that no empire falls alone. It takes pride. It takes blindness. It takes the human need to be more than human. But the world doesn't need our permission to continue. It always does. As the fires of Moscow faded into frost, the world exhaled. The snow fell soft, and somewhere beneath the silence, history turned over in its sleep.